Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something a lot of you have been asking about, Notion. It's one of those tools that's been making waves, especially among women entrepreneurs, and we wanted to take a closer look at why that is. We found this really interesting article on womenentrepreneurs.biz that breaks down Notion's success and what we can all learn from it. Honestly, I have to admit, I was a bit late to the Notion party. At first glance, it just seemed like, another note-taking app. But let me tell you, it's so much more than that. Think of it as a central hub for all your work stuff. You can manage tasks, you can take notes, build databases. It's seriously impressive.
It's that flexibility that really sets Notion apart, especially for entrepreneurs. And what's really smart about their approach is that it's not just about throwing a million features at you, it's about giving users the power to build their own systems. You know what I mean? They have these really cool modular blocks and templates that you can customize to fit however you work.
Right, it's amazing.
Need a content calendar? Boom, Notion's got you. Sales pipeline? Done. It's that adaptability, that ability to shape the tool to your specific needs that's so powerful for entrepreneurs.
Totally agree. And you know what else really stood out to me in the article? The community aspect. Notion has this incredible community of users who are constantly sharing tips, templates, you name it. Their template library is insane. It's like having a whole team of productivity gurus at your disposal.
It's such a smart move from a business perspective, too. When you empower your users to become creators, like Notion does with these templates, you tap into this amazing energy. It's not just about the product anymore. It's about the whole ecosystem you build around it.
For sure. And that sense of community can be so valuable, especially when you're an entrepreneur and you're building something new.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head.
It's like having this built-in support system, which, let's be honest, we can all use a little bit of that.
Couldn't agree more. It's huge.
And you know what else I love about Notion? It's powerful, don't get me wrong, but it's not one of those tools that makes you feel like you need a computer science degree just to figure it out.
Right.
I've tried some of those project management systems.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about overwhelming. But Notion strikes that perfect balance.
Yeah.
It's robust enough for some serious work, but it's still intuitive enough for anyone to pick up.
Yeah, I think the article really hit the nail on the head when they talked about that balance, between capability and simplicity.
Hmm.
Notion has this crazy amount of depth. I mean, you've got Kanban boards, databases, the whole nine yards, but it never feels like too much.
Yeah.
They've somehow managed to avoid that whole feature overload trap that a lot of tech products fall into.
Speaking of databases, that's one thing I was surprised by, how much I ended up using them in Notion.
Really?
You know how as entrepreneurs we end up with like spreadsheets for this and notes for that and contacts scattered everywhere.
Oh, tell me about it.
Notion lets you create these custom databases to pull all that stuff together in one place. It's kind of like having your own mini CRM, project tracker, content library, all rolled into one.
Oh, that's awesome. I can see how that would be a game changer.
It's been huge for me in terms of staying organized, especially as things start to get busier.
Yeah, it just goes to show you, sometimes those features that seem a little intimidating at first,
Right.
they can end up being the ones that really transform your workflow.
Totally. So, we've been singing Notion's praises here, and for good reason.
Yeah.
But the article does a good job of pointing out some potential downsides too, which I think is important for us to be aware of.
Of course. Yeah.
Like, for example, you talk about that fine line between offering a ton of features and overwhelming users with too many options.
It's a tough one, right?
It is, that whole feature overload thing. It's a real thing.
It's easy to get caught up in adding more and more, especially in the tech world.
Right.
But sometimes I think it's more important to focus on nailing those core features, making sure the user experience is smooth and intuitive.
Totally.
It's all about finding that balance.
Right.
Giving users the power they need without overwhelming them with bells and whistles they'll never use.
Exactly. It's a good reminder for all of us, even when you've got a product as successful as Notion, there are always those trade-offs to consider.
I'm sure.
And speaking of trade-offs, another thing the article touched on was Notion's reliance on internet connectivity. Now, I'll be honest, that's not something that's ever really bothered me personally, but I can see how for some people, especially if they're working in areas with spotty internet, it could be a drawback.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights how important it is for entrepreneurs to really think about those different user contexts. Like even if you're building a primarily online tool, are there ways you could incorporate offline functionality? Could you offer a limited feature set offline or look into ways to sync data when users are back online?
Right, right. Those are really good points. It's all about anticipating those needs, even if they're not immediately obvious.
Exactly. Thinking outside the box.
So for all you entrepreneurs listening, the article actually gives some really great advice on how to apply Notion's success to your own ventures. And the first thing they emphasize is, drumroll please, solving a real problem.
The good old-fashioned advice.
I know, right? It sounds so basic, but it's true. The key is to make sure you're actually addressing a genuine pain point that your target audience is experiencing. Don't just chase after the latest trends. Build something that people actually need and want.
So true. And that ties back to what we were talking about earlier about understanding your audience.
Mm.
You've got to know who you're building for, what their workflows are like, what their biggest frustrations are. The article talked about how Notion used user feedback extensively to shape their products, constantly iterating and improving based on what their users were telling them.
See, I love hearing that because it reinforces that idea that it's not about building something in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's about bringing your users along on the journey, being responsive to their needs, and evolving the product alongside them.
100%. It's that collaborative spirit.
And speaking of collaboration, we can't talk about Notion without mentioning that amazing community they've built.
Right. It's huge.
The article really emphasized how important that community has been to their growth, how those users have become some of their biggest advocates. It's like they've created this self-perpetuating cycle of engagement and growth.
It's incredible the power of a really strong community.
Now, to keep things real, the article doesn't just sugarcoat Notion's success. They also acknowledge that, like any company, they face challenges, especially in such a competitive market.
Oh, for sure. The productivity space is packed.
Right. And I think it's easy to look at a company like Notion and think, oh, they've made it.
Right.
But the reality is they're constantly having to innovate, to stay ahead of the curve, to differentiate themselves from the competition.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that any entrepreneur can relate to, that constant need to be aware of your surroundings, to be adaptable, to keep pushing forward.
Exactly. And on that note, I think the article ended on a really thought-provoking point. They talked about how in this increasingly digital world, we haven't even begun to imagine all the ways technology will shape how we work and live in the future.
It's true. It's really mind-blowing when you think about it.
And it made me wonder, what kind of problems will we be solving 5, 10 years down the line? What kind of tools will we need?
Such a great question.
It's both exciting and a little bit daunting.
Totally. And it's a good reminder that we need to stay curious, stay adaptable, and never stop learning.
Couldn't agree more. So there you have it, our deep dive into Notion, the good, the bad, and the future-proof. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you tried Notion? What's your go-to productivity tool? Head over to our social media pages and share your experiences. Until next time, stay productive, everyone.